Hello there, and welcome to Deep Earth Stories. Get comfortable. Turn the lights down if you can. Because what we are about to explore together has been waiting a very, very long time for someone to listen. But before that, tell me in comments where are you listening from and what time is there right now. And please subscribe to my channel. Tonight we are going to take a very slow journey together. A journey that goes backward. Far backward. Past everything you know. Past every city, every road, every written word, every kingdom that ever rose and fell. Past all of it. We are going back 12,000 years. Maybe you are lying in bed right now. Maybe the room is dark, or nearly dark. Maybe there is a soft light somewhere, a lamp, a screen turned down low, a sliver of moonlight at the edge of a curtain. Maybe your body is already beginning to feel heavy. Your shoulders are settling. Your breath is getting a little slower. That is good. That is exactly where we want to be. You do not have to hold on to every word tonight. You do not have to remember any of this in the morning. This story will carry you gently, and if you drift away somewhere in the middle of it, that is perfectly fine. That is the whole point. Just let the words come. Let them wash over you, the way a slow river washes over smooth stones. Tonight, the story is about a place, a very old, very strange, very beautiful place. A place that was built before the wheel, before pottery, before farming had really taken hold anywhere on Earth, before any of the things we think of when we think of civilization. A place that was built, used for thousands of years, and then, quietly, carefully, deliberately, buried. Not by disaster, not by flood or fire or the slow crush of forgotten time. No, buried by the people who built it. On purpose. The place is called Göbekli Tepe. You can say it like this, Göbekli Tepe. It is a Turkish name, and it means something simple and almost tender. It means Potbelly Hill. A small, rounded hill in the southeast of what is now Turkey, near the border with Syria, rising gently from a dry and ancient landscape of golden stone and dusty grass. From the outside, it looks like almost nothing. Just a hill, but underneath that hill, packed carefully into the earth, are circles of massive stone pillars. Tall, T-shaped stones, some of them 6 meters high, some weighing 20 tons. And on the faces of those stones, carved with tools made from flint, no metal, no machines, just hands and stone and time, there are animals. Foxes, lions, vultures, scorpions, snakes, spiders, cranes, gazelles. A whole carved world of creatures, frozen in stone, looking out from a time so old it barely has a name. No one lived there. At least no one seems to have lived there. There are no sleeping spaces, no cooking hearths, no beds, no storage rooms for food. People came to this place, and they built something enormous, and they gathered there and then they went home somewhere else. And when they were done, they covered it all up. They filled in the stone circles with rubble and soil and fragments of broken tools and animal bones. They buried their own creation, as if placing it to sleep. As if saying, this is not for forever, this is for now, and for something only we understand, and when we are done, we will tuck it in, the way you tuck in a child at night. And the hill kept it secret for 12,000 years, until a German archaeologist named Klaus Schmidt looked at it in 1994 and understood something no one else had understood before. But we will get to that. We have all night. For now, just let that image sit with you. A hill in the middle of an ancient world. Stone circles deep in the dark earth. Animals carved in limestone. Still and patient. waiting in a silence that has lasted longer than any word. Let your breath slow a little more. We are just beginning. There is a question I want to sit with you tonight. It is not a frightening question. It is a quiet one. The kind of question you do not need to answer, only to hold. The question is this: what were they doing? Not in a hurried, anxious way, not the way a puzzle demands to be solved, more like the way you wonder about a dream you had years ago that you can almost but not quite remember. A dream that had a feeling to it, something enormous and gentle, something that made you feel small in a good way. What were these people doing 12,000 years ago on a dry hill in what would one day become Turkey? They had no writing. They had no metal. They had no cities, no governments, no stored grain, no wheels to carry heavy things. They were hunter-gatherers, people who moved with the seasons, following animals, gathering plants, sleeping under open sky and inside temporary shelters. Their lives, by our modern standards, would look impossibly simple, impossibly difficult, both at the same time. And yet they built this. Circles of enormous carved stones, set in perfect arrangements, filled with artwork so detailed and careful that archaeologists today are still arguing about what it all means. They built something that required, by most estimates, hundreds of people working together over many generations. They built it without any of the tools or systems we assume are necessary for that kind of coordination. No writing to keep records, no central authority with a palace and a treasury, no roads, no trucks, no cranes, just people, just hands, just intention. The second question, even quieter than the first, is this: what did they feel when they were here? Standing inside one of those great stone circles, in the early morning before the sun had risen, before the warmth came back to the air, looking up at the carved animals on the tall T-shaped pillars, hearing perhaps the low sound of someone drumming or chanting or simply breathing in a rhythm together. What did they feel? We cannot know. Not really. But we can imagine. And sometimes, when we imagine very slowly, with a quiet mind, we come closer to understanding than we expect. Let your eyes rest if they want to. Let the room around you go soft. We are going back. All the way back to the beginning. Chapter 1. The landscape that made them. To understand Göbekli Tepe, we need to understand the land it sits in. Because no place is just a place. Every place has a body, a climate, a smell, a texture. And the place where Göbekli Tepe was built was 12,000 years ago, a world undergoing one of the most dramatic changes in all of human history. The last great ice age was ending. For tens of thousands of years before that moment, the world had been cold. Not everywhere equally, but in a general, deep, patient cold that shaped everything. The plants, the animals, the routes humans walked, the ways they lived. Glaciers stretched across enormous parts of the northern world. Sea levels were lower. Forests that we know today as lush and green were sparse and different. The whole texture of the earth was different. And then, very slowly, over thousands of years, which is slow to us but fast in the long breath of geological time, the world began to warm. The ice pulled back, rivers swelled, forests crept northward. New kinds of plants grew in soils that had been frozen for generations. Animals moved and changed, and in some cases disappeared entirely. The great woolly mammoths, the cave lions, the giant elk with antlers like the spread wings of a bird. Many of these creatures vanished in the warming world, unable to adapt. Quickly enough, unable to follow the cold to wherever it retreated, and human beings, our ancestors, watched all of this happen. Think about what that would mean. To be a person who had lived your whole life in one kind of world, following certain animals, eating certain plants, knowing where to go when the cold got sharp, knowing where. The water would be in the dry season, and then to have that world slowly, undeniably change around you. The animals your grandparents hunted were gone, or rare, or different. The plants had shifted. The rivers ran differently. Even the horizon looked different, as trees grew up where there had once been open grassland. This was the world of the people who built Göbekli Tepe. They lived in what archaeologists call the pre-pottery Neolithic period, which is a careful academic way of saying the time right before humans fully settled down, right before they began making fired clay pots, right at the edge of the agricultural revolution that would change everything. The region we are talking about, the Fertile Crescent, that curve of land stretching from modern-day Turkey through Syria, Lebanon, Israel and Iraq, was already one of the richest places on earth for wild plants and animals. Wild grasses that would one day become wheat and barley grew here in thick, generous stands. Gazelles grazed on the open hills. Deer, wild boar, foxes, wolves and countless birds filled the landscape. The rivers ran clean and cold from the mountains. It was, in a word, abundant. And into this abundant world, after the great cold retreated, people came. People who were skilled and intelligent and observant. People who had been developing complex tools, complex languages, complex social bonds for tens of thousands of years before this moment. They came to the hills of what is now southeastern Turkey, and they found, or they chose, a place that felt significant. We do not know exactly why they chose this particular hill. Maybe it was the view. From the top of Göbekli Tepe, you can see for miles in every direction, across a wide, flat plain ringed by distant mountains. Maybe it was the stone. The limestone here is soft enough to carve but strong enough to last. Maybe it was something else entirely. Something in the quality of the air, the direction of the wind, the way the stars aligned with certain peaks on the horizon. Or maybe it was something we will never be able to name. A feeling, a sense of the sacred that does not translate into any language that has been invented since. They looked at this hill, and something in them said, "Here." And here is where they built. Now let me tell you about the stones themselves, because they deserve their own quiet moment. The limestone of this region has a particular quality. It is cream-coloured, sometimes almost white, sometimes leaning toward a warm tan or pale gold. When the morning sun hits it at a low angle, it glows, not dramatically. Nothing about this place is dramatic in the loud, obvious way, but there is a warmth to it, a softness. The people who built Göbekli Tepe carved their massive T-shaped pillars from this limestone. They found outcroppings of it in the hillside itself and in nearby quarry areas, and they shaped the rock using tools made of flint, a hard, sharp stone that can be worked into. Precise cutting edges. Imagine doing that. Imagine crouching over a 20-ton block of limestone with nothing but a handheld piece of flint, and slowly, patiently carving it into shape. Shaping the wide, flat top of the T, smoothing the long vertical shaft, working the surface until it was clean and even. And then, only then, beginning the animals. The animals on these pillars are not crude. They are not the scratched, hopeful marks of someone who just discovered they could make a line on a surface. They are confident. They are detailed. The vultures have feathered wings with individual feather lines carved into the stone. The foxes show muscle beneath the skin. The scorpions have their segmented bodies rendered with care. The snakes coil and curve, their scales suggested in the stone with steady, practiced hands. These were not beginners. The people who made these carvings had a long tradition of making things. They came from a lineage of artists and toolmakers that stretched back tens of thousands of years. The cave paintings of Europe, the carved figurines, the carefully shaped tools, all of that was in their blood, in their memory, in the way their hands knew how to move. But they brought all of that accumulated skill and knowledge to this one place, and they poured it into stone that would last. Let your breath go even slower now. There is no rush. The night is long. The story is patient. Chapter 2. The pillars that stand like people. Here is something that archaeologists noticed early in the excavations at Göbekli Tepe, and that has never stopped being strange and fascinating. The tall T-shaped pillars, the big central ones in each enclosure, have arms. Not real arms. Carved arms. Carved into the sides of the pillar shaft, bent at the elbow, hands pointing forward. And sometimes belt-like bands carved at the waist, and occasionally what appears to be clothing, a simple garment rendered in stone. These pillars look like people. Not completely, they are still clearly pillars, tall, abstract, geometric. But the arms, the belts, the suggestion of a body and a presence, these details tell us that whoever designed these pillars intended them to be more than just structural elements. They intended them to be entities. Presences, perhaps ancestors, or spirits, or deities. Perhaps something that our language and our categories cannot quite hold. And they stand in those circles together, two tall central pillars in the middle of each enclosure, surrounded by a ring of smaller pillars, all facing inward. All facing each other. As if gathered. As if in conversation, or in ceremony, or in some kind of shared silence that we cannot hear anymore. When Klaus Schmidt first looked at Göbekli Tepe and realised what he was seeing, one of the things he said was that these were not houses for human beings. They were houses for spirits, or for gods, or for the dead, or for something that existed between all of those categories. He called Göbekli Tepe the world's oldest temple. Now that word, temple, is a loaded word. It comes with a lot of our own assumptions and images. It calls up specific things: priests in robes, burning incense, written prayers, official doctrines, institutional religion with rules and hierarchies and power structures. None of that was necessarily happening at Göbekli Tepe. What was happening was something older, and perhaps simpler, and perhaps more raw and honest than any of the formal religious systems that would come later. Something closer to the original human impulse toward the sacred, the impulse that says, there are things bigger than me, and bigger than us, and it matters how we stand in. Relation to them. There are things that require a place. A special place. A place set apart from the everyday. A place where the ordinary rules of life are suspended and something else can come through. We have always known this, as a species. Long before the first word was written, long before the first city was built, we were already building these spaces, these meeting points between the human and the something beyond human. Göbekli Tepe is just the oldest one we have found so far, and here is a thought to rest in. As your body settles deeper into where you are lying, there have probably been other places like this, older than Göbekli Tepe, that we have not found and may never find. Places built of wood, not stone, that rotted away and left nothing. Places that were not buried and preserved, but were instead exposed to rain and wind and time until there was nothing left. Places in forests that are now under ocean, on coastlines that sank as the glaciers melted and the seas rose. The story of the deep human past is mostly silence, mostly darkness, mostly the absence of evidence. Göbekli Tepe is one of the rare places where the darkness speaks, and what it says, in the language of carved stone and careful burial and hundreds of animal images, is something that still vibrates in us today. In the part of us that looks up at a night sky and feels something we cannot name. In the part of us that stands at the edge of the ocean and goes quiet. In the part of us that sometimes, in the stillness of a night like this one, feels very small and very ancient and very connected to something enormous. That feeling. That is what was being built into stone 12,000 years ago on a golden hill in a warming world. Let your body be heavy now. Let the weight of 12,000 years settle gently around you, like a very soft blanket of time. We are just 2 chapters in. There is so much more to discover. But there is no hurry. The hill has waited 12,000 years. it can wait a little longer. The excavations at Göbekli Tepe began in earnest in 1995, the year after Klaus Schmidt visited and recognised the site for what it was. Before Schmidt, others had come here. A team from the University of Chicago had surveyed the area in the 1960s and made note of the hill. A Turkish researcher named Meydid Zdorn had also written about it, but they had looked at the flint tools on the surface, at the presence of limestone, at the general contours of the landscape, and thought, maybe a Byzantine cemetery, maybe a medieval site, something old, but not that old. Schmidt looked at the same hill and thought something different. He had spent years working on Neolithic sites in the region. He knew what to look for, and what he saw at Göbekli Tepe, the scale of the mounding, the specific shape of certain stones half visible in the eroded surface, the quality of the flint scatters told him that he was looking at something from a period much deeper in time. He came back. He brought a team. They began to dig, and what they found stunned the archaeological world. Enclosures, stone circles, pillar after pillar, carved and placed with intention. Not one circle, or two, but many, more than 20, possibly as many as 200 separate stone enclosures, stacked and layered beneath the hill. The ones that have been excavated so far are remarkable. The ones still waiting in the earth are, in a way, even more remarkable, because they are still perfectly preserved, packed in their dry limestone sediment, untouched, waiting. Most of Göbekli Tepe has not yet been excavated. The archaeologists have taken great care to dig slowly, methodically, and only in certain areas, leaving the rest sealed inside the hill for future generations with better tools and better techniques. Which means that the full story of Göbekli Tepe has not yet been told. Maybe it never fully will be. And there is something beautiful about that. Something appropriate. A place that has been keeping secrets for 12,000 years seems entitled to keep a few more for a while longer. Klaus Schmidt spent decades at Göbekli Tepe. He worked there every season until his death in 2014. He called it his life's work. He said, more than once, that he believed the site would force a fundamental rewriting of the story of early human civilization. Not a small adjustment, not a footnote. A rewriting. He was right. Because everything that had been assumed about the development of complex human society, the sequence, the order of things, rested on what archaeologists call the Neolithic. Revolution. The idea that farming came first. People settled down, grew crops, had surplus food, developed complex social structures from that surplus, and only then had the time and resources to build large monuments. Agriculture leads to civilization. Civilization leads to monumental architecture. That was the assumed order. Göbekli Tepe flips it. Here was monumental architecture, enormous, complex, carefully planned and executed, built by people who were not yet farmers, people who were still primarily hunting and gathering, people who had no pottery, no permanent settlements nearby, no agricultural surplus to draw on. So maybe it was not agriculture that led to complex society. Maybe it was the other way around. Maybe the desire to gather, to build, to create shared sacred spaces, maybe that came first. Maybe the monument came before the city, not after it. Maybe the gathering place created the community that eventually, over generations, decided it made sense to settle down near this important place, to grow food to feed the people, who came to build and maintain it. Maybe the temple made the farmer. This is still debated among scholars. It is a big idea, and big ideas take time to settle, but it is a thought that grows in you, slowly, like a seed pressed into warm soil. Let it grow in you now, quietly, without forcing it. You do not need to decide anything tonight. Chapter 3. The Animals in the Stone. Let me take you back to the carvings, because I keep returning to them, and I think that is right. They deserve to be returned to. the way you return to a piece of music that stays in your head long after you have heard it. The animals at Göbekli Tepe are everywhere, on the tall central pillars, on the smaller surrounding pillars, on the walls of the enclosures, carved in high relief, meaning they stand out from the surface of the stone. Some are quite large, a fox might be the size of your forearm, some are smaller, tucked into corners of a composition, and they are not random. The specific animals chosen and the way they are arranged seem to follow some logic that we are still trying to understand. Certain animals appear together. Certain animals appear only in certain enclosures. Certain creatures are carved at certain heights on the pillars, and others at different heights. There is an argument that the carvings represent a cosmology, a picture of how the world was organised, spiritually and symbolically, that different animals stood for different forces or qualities or realms of existence, that the pillars themselves, with their arms and their carved garments, were beings positioned within that cosmological map, surrounded by their associated creatures. Vultures appear frequently. In many ancient cultures of this region, vultures were associated with death and transformation. They were the birds who came to the body after death, who transformed flesh back into something else. In that sense, they were liminal creatures, creatures of the threshold, not quite of the living world, not quite of whatever lies beyond. Scorpions too, ancient, dangerous, nocturnal, associated in later cultures of the Middle East with the underworld, with transition, with the dangerous passages of night and death and rebirth. Snakes, coiling, patient, shedding their skin and thus suggesting renewal, transformation, the cycle of death and return. And foxes. Foxes are everywhere at Göbekli Tepe, cunning, quick, adaptable, creatures of the edge, not quite wild and not quite tame, not quite predator and not quite prey. Perhaps the fox stood for something like cleverness, or the trickster quality that many traditions around the world have associated with the beings who move between worlds. It is all speculation, of course. We have no written record, no Rosetta Stone for the symbolic language of Göbekli Tepe. We are reading a message in a script that has no dictionary. But that is all right. We can still feel the intent behind it. We can still sense that these were not random marks, not decoration for decoration's sake, but a visual language expressing something about how the people who made them understood the world. And one thing that language seems to be saying, over and over again in its carved animals and standing pillar people, is something like this. We are not alone. The world is full of other kinds of beings, animals, spirits, ancestors, forces, and we are in relationship with them. And this place, this circle of stone pillars, this gathering place, is where we come to acknowledge and honour those relationships. We are not alone. Maybe that message is still being sent. Maybe we are still receiving it, 12,000 years later, in the part of us that feels something when we see an animal moving quietly in the early morning, or when we stand under a vast open sky and feel the world looking back at us. The stone is still speaking. Let yourself listen, just a little, in the way that the body listens, not the mind. The soft, receiving way. Your breath is slowing. Your thoughts are becoming like clouds, drifting rather than rushing. That is good. We are about halfway through the first part of our journey tonight. There is so much more ahead, more about the people who built this place, more about why they buried it, more about what it tells us about who we are as a species. But for now, let the images rest in you. The cream-coloured stone, the carved fox, the T-shaped pillar with its carved arms, standing in a circle with others like it, in the deep cool dark of a chamber that had not been opened in 12,000 years. Let that rest in you. The hill keeps its secrets gently. There is no urgency in its silence, only patience and depth and the slow passage of an enormous amount of time. Chapter 4. The Hands That Built It. I want to think with you for a while about the people themselves, not the abstract hunter-gatherers of the pre-pottery Neolithic B phase, the people. The actual individual human beings who stood on that hill and lifted those stones and chipped away at limestone with flint tools, day after day, season after season. They had names, though we will never know them. They had faces, different faces, families, people they loved, people they argued with, children who played at their feet while they worked, elders who told stories by the fire, at night about why this place mattered and what it was for. They had fears and dreams and moments of great beauty and moments of ordinary tedium. They were fully human. In terms of biology, there is no difference between the people at Göbekli Tepe and you or me. Their brains were the same size. Their capacity for language, for feeling, for complex thought, for empathy, for wonder, identical to ours. If you could somehow bring a child from that time forward into today's world, they would learn to read, to use a phone, to navigate a city, just as any child does. The only difference was what they knew. Not how much they could know, but what had accumulated and been passed down in the particular river of human culture that flowed through their time and place. They did not know about metals, because that knowledge had not been developed yet. They did not know about writing, because that had not been invented yet. They did not know about agriculture as a stable system, because that was only just beginning to emerge. But they knew an enormous amount about the world they lived in. They knew the stars, in detail, in depth, in ways that modern people have largely forgotten. They knew which stars rose at which times of year, and what that meant for the movements of animals, the flooding of rivers, the ripening of wild grains. They knew the landscape around them the way you know the inside of your own home, every path, every seasonal water source, every rocky outcrop where certain animals sheltered, every grove of wild almond or wild einkorn wheat. They knew stone. They knew how limestone cracked along certain plains, and how to find and use those planes to split a large block cleanly. They knew flint, its different qualities in different outcroppings, which pieces were best for carving, which were best for cutting, which were best for fine detail work. And they knew each other. One of the quiet revolutions in our understanding of early human life over the last few decades is the growing realization that our ancestors were not isolated, not brutish. Not living in small, disconnected bands of a few dozen people who rarely interacted with anyone else. They were networked. Not in the way we mean that word today, with its screens and its instant connections, but in the old, rich human way, through trade, through seasonal gatherings, through marriage and kinship ties that stretched across hundreds of miles, through the shared language of symbols and stories and song. The shell ornaments found at sites like Göbekli Tepe came from the coast, hundreds of kilometres away. The obsidian blades came from volcanic sources even farther. These objects arrived through chains of exchange, passing from hand to hand, from community to community, across an enormous geographic web of human relationship. So when we think of the people who built Göbekli Tepe, we should not think of a small local group doing something isolated and local. We should think of something more like a centre, a place that people came to from a wide area, perhaps from the whole of the upper Mesopotamian landscape, perhaps from even farther. A place that was known and significant and talked about, and that drew people together across the distances of the ancient world. A place of gathering. And in that gathering, in the shared work of cutting and moving and carving enormous stones, in the shared ceremony and shared meals and shared sleeping under the open sky near the sacred hill, something was built that was more than just physical architecture. Community was built. Identity was built. Perhaps even the earliest forms of what we might call culture, shared stories, shared symbols, shared understandings of what it means to be human and what lies beyond the human, were being woven together and strengthened in this place. Göbekli Tepe was not just a temple, it was a place where a people became a people. That is worth sitting with for a moment. The way a shared place can make a community. The way working together on something enormous and meaningful can create bonds that last for generations. The way a sacred centre can give scattered people a shared sense of home, even if they only visit it a few times in their lives. We still do this. in different forms, with different symbols, and different kinds of buildings and gatherings. But the impulse is the same. The need for a centre, a meeting place, a shared something that holds a community together across the distances of ordinary life. That need is 12,000 years old at least, probably much older. It is in you, right now, even as you rest in the dark. That old deep need for connection, for belonging, for a sense of something shared and sacred and larger than the individual self. Let it rest in you gently. Let it be a comfort rather than a weight. You are part of a very long story, a story that began long before you and will continue long after. But you are in it. Right now, tonight, you are part of the long human reaching toward the sacred, the beautiful, the shared. The people of Göbekli Tepe would not understand your life, but they would understand that reaching, instantly, without any words needed. It is getting late, or early. The room is quiet, your body is soft. We have travelled a long way together tonight, just in this first part of the journey. We have walked across 12,000 years of time and arrived at a golden hill in a warming ancient world. We have met the people who built it, not as names, but as presences, as hands, as minds full of the night sky and the behaviour of foxes and the way limestone breaks along a plain. We have stood inside the stone circles and looked up at the carved T-shaped pillars with their carved arms and felt something quiet and old and familiar. And we have sat with a question that does not need an answer. What were they doing? What we know is this. They were here. They cared enough about something to spend lifetimes building it. They cared enough to fill it with beauty. They cared enough to bury it when they were done, not destroy it, not abandon it carelessly, but lay it down with purpose. And the earth kept it safe. For us. For a German archaeologist to stumble toward on a warm afternoon in 1994, for teams of careful researchers to spend decades uncovering, brushing, documenting, for the rest of us to learn about, slowly, in the quiet dark of a night, when the weight of 12,000 years feels like the most comfortable blanket in the world. If your eyes are closing, let them close. If your thoughts are drifting, let them drift. We will go deeper into this story together, into the mystery of the burial, into the questions about the ceremonies that took place there, into the astonishing idea that this place may have helped birth the agricultural revolution itself. We will follow the story all the way through, slowly, gently, without hurry. But for now, let the image of the hill be enough. A rounded hill in a dry, golden landscape. Stone circles sleeping deep inside it. Carved animals frozen in limestone, still and patient. 12,000 years of silence, broken only by the wind and by the slow sound of your breathing in the dark. The hill is still there. Even now, as you rest, it is there. On the other side of the world, in the dark of a different time zone, that small rounded hill sits quietly in the dry landscape of southeastern Turkey. The stars above it are the same stars that were above it 12,000 years ago, a little shifted in the sky, because the Earth wobbles very slowly on its axis over long periods of time, the way a spinning top wobbles when it begins to slow. But the same stars, the same deep black sky, the same ancient light falling on old stone. The archaeologists have covered most of the excavated areas with protective roofing, simple functional shelters to keep the rain off the carvings, to slow the weathering that open air would bring. Underneath those shelters, the stone pillars stand in their circles, just as they were placed, just as they were found. They have been waiting for a long time. Tonight we are going deeper into the hill, deeper into the question of what happened there, and why, and what it means for the story of who we are. We are going to walk through the enclosures together. We are going to think about the ceremonies that may have taken place in those stone circles, in the firelight, under the stars. We are going to begin to approach the strangest part of the whole story, the deliberate burial, and we are going to sit with that mystery the way you sit with a fire, not trying to explain it, just watching it, feeling its warmth. But we will get there slowly. There is no hurry tonight. Chapter 5. Inside the enclosures. Imagine you are walking toward Göbekli Tepe in the early morning. The sky is pale, not quite dark anymore, not yet light. That in-between colour, that soft blue-grey that exists only for a short time each day, only in the moments before the sun decides to appear. The air is cool and very still. Your breath makes a small cloud that dissolves quickly. The hill rises ahead of you. From this distance it looks unremarkable, a gentle swell in the landscape, not dramatic, not towering. Just a hill, rounded and quiet, covered in dry grass and scattered rock. But you have been here before. You know what is inside. You walk up the slope. Your feet know the way. There is a path worn into the ground by the feet of those who came before you, season after season, year after year. The stones are smooth where hands have touched them. And then you descend into the enclosure. The first thing you notice is the change in the air. It is cooler down here, slightly, more sheltered. The wind that was moving across the hilltop does not reach you here. There is a stillness that feels deliberate, like a room with its door gently closed against the noise of the world outside. The walls rise around you, not tall walls, but enough to define the space. And inside the defined space, the pillars. The two central pillars are the tallest. They rise to about 5 or 6 meters, about the height of a 2-story building. They are T-shaped, with the wide flat top piece jutting out on either side like shoulders. And down the length of the shaft, carved in careful relief, are the arms bent at the elbow, ending in hands that point forward and slightly downward, fingers visible. They look, in the half-light of early morning, like figures, like presences, like beings that are standing very still, the way something stands still when it is watching. You do not feel afraid. That is the interesting thing. You feel observed. You feel seen. And in that feeling there is something that is not comfortable exactly, but is not uncomfortable either. It is more like the feeling of being in the presence of something ancient and patient. Something that has been here much longer than you, and will be here long after you are gone. The smaller pillars ring the central pair. They are set into stone benches along the inner wall of the enclosure. They face inward, toward the centre. Toward the two tall beings in the middle. And every surface is alive with carving. Let your eyes move slowly around the space. There, a fox, carved on the shaft of one of the smaller pillars. Its body is muscular and alert, its tail high, its face turned slightly as if it heard something just outside the frame. It is remarkably lifelike. Not stylized in the way that art from later periods often becomes, not reduced to a symbol of a fox, but an attempt to render this specific animal, this quality of foxness, in stone. There, a snake, coiling down the edge of a pillar, its scales rendered individually. It curves around the corner of the stone as if it is actually moving, as if it has just arrived here from somewhere else and is still in the middle of its journey. There, high on the central pillar, near the shoulder of the T, a belt. Carved in stone. Simple, a band across the waist of the pillar person. And beneath the belt, what appears to be a loincloth, its edge carved in a simple decorative pattern. This pillar is dressed. The being in the centre of the enclosure, the tall, patient, watching presence, is wearing clothes. That detail, more than almost anything else at Göbekli Tepe, lands with a kind of quiet force. Because clothing is a deeply human thing, it implies a body that needs covering. It implies a sense of self-presentation, of appearance, of being seen in a particular way. It implies perhaps an identity, a role, a status. This being has a role. And you, standing in this enclosure in the early morning half-light, are in the presence of that role. You have come to be in relationship with it, to acknowledge it, to bring something of yourself to the encounter, your attention, your presence, perhaps your voice in prayer or song or ritual speech. What do you say? What would you say to a carved stone being that stood here before your grandmother's grandmother was born, that will stand here long after your grandchildren's grandchildren have come and gone? We do not know what was said, we can only imagine the shape of the silence that surrounded the saying. Now let the image soften. Let the early morning enclosure fade just slightly, like a photograph left in the light. Keep the feeling, but let the sharp edges go. You do not need to hold it precisely. The feeling is enough. The sense of standing in a place designed for standing in, a place where something larger than ordinary life was being acknowledged. A place where the small individual human being, one person with one lifetime, with one particular set of joys and fears, could stand in the presence of something that had been, here forever and would be here forever, and feel both very small and somehow held. That is the gift of sacred spaces. And Göbekli Tepe was, in its way, the first known gift of that kind. Chapter 6. The question of ceremony. What actually happened at Göbekli Tepe? The physical evidence gives us some clues, and they are interesting clues, though like everything else about this place they raise as many questions as the answer. Enormous quantities of animal bones have been found at the site. Not just a few scattered remains, but large deposits, the bones of wild aurochs, which were the wild ancestors of modern cattle. Enormous and powerful animals that stood nearly, 2 meters tall at the shoulder, the bones of wild boar, gazelle, red deer, birds. These were not just the remains of casual meals. The quantities suggest feasting, large-scale, communal feasting, the kind that happens when many people come together for a shared purpose and share food as part of that purpose. Think of the largest meal you have ever shared, a holiday gathering perhaps, or a wedding, or some other event where food was at the centre, where the act of eating together was itself a part of the ceremony, where the shared meal was not just fuel, but meaning. That seems to have been happening at Göbekli Tepe. People came from across the landscape, from their scattered camps and seasonal territories, and they gathered here. And they ate together. Probably they worked together. The ongoing project of building and expanding the enclosures would have required many hands, and the work of building could itself have been a form of ceremony. Not drudgery, but offering. Not labour, but devotion. There is a concept in the study of religion and anthropology called communal labour as ritual. The idea that the act of working together on something sacred is itself a sacred act. That in the effort, the sweat, the coordination, the shared difficulty, something is built that is not physical, a bond, a shared identity, a sense of belonging to something larger. The people of Göbekli Tepe may have understood this deeply, even without the vocabulary to name it. They came to build, and in the building they became something together that they could not have been apart. There is also evidence of stone vessels, large troughs carved from limestone that may have been used to hold liquids. Some researchers have suggested that these were used to ferment grain into a kind of beer, or to prepare other fermented beverages for ceremonial consumption. Fermented grain drinks appear very early in human culture across the world. They were often associated with ceremony, with altered states of consciousness, with the blurring of the boundary between the ordinary world and whatever lies beyond it. This is speculative. We cannot say for certain that Göbekli Tepe had ceremonial brewing, but the presence of the troughs, combined with the wild cereal grains that grew abundantly in the region, makes it a reasonable possibility. And there is something quietly wonderful about it, if it is true that 12,000 years ago, human beings gathered on a hill and shared a drink and felt the ordinary world become a little softer, a little more permeable, a little more open to the presence of the sacred. That some version of that impulse to mark a gathering with something shared and slightly transformative has been with us since the very beginning. We are creatures of ceremony. We have always needed our moments of marking, of saying this time is different, this moment is set apart. Here we are not just surviving, we are living fully in the awareness of something larger. Göbekli Tepe was that marking, on a very grand scale in very patient stone. Let that thought settle into you, the sense of being part of a long, long line of beings who needed ceremony, who needed the gathering, who needed the shared meal, the shared work, the shared silence inside a circle of stones. You are not alone in that need. You have never been alone in it, and now let the story breathe for just a moment. Let me invite you to notice your body wherever it is resting. Notice the weight of it, the way it presses gently into whatever is beneath you, the mattress, the pillow, the soft give of the surface under your back or your side. Notice the warmth at the centre of you, the gentle rise and fall of your chest. You have been carrying the whole day in your body, all the small tensions and efforts and decisions, all the noise of the world, the light from screens, the sounds from outside, the countless small demands that the waking hours place on us. Let all of that go now. Like setting down something you have been carrying for a long time, setting it carefully on the ground and stepping back from it. It will all be there when you need it. But right now, in this moment, you do not need any of it. Just the breath. Just the weight of your body. Just the slow, quiet dark. The hill is patient. The story continues. Chapter 7. The Builders and the Stars. One of the most quietly stunning things about Göbekli Tepe is its relationship with the sky. The site sits at a particular latitude and elevation, and the enclosures are oriented in specific directions that archaeologists and astronomers have studied carefully. Several of the enclosures appear to be aligned with significant astronomical events: the rising or setting of particular stars, the position of the sun at solstice, the path of certain constellations across the sky. This is not unique to Göbekli Tepe. Across the world, from Stonehenge in England to Chichen Itza in Mexico to the Great Pyramids of Egypt, ancient people built their most important structures with careful attention to the heavens. The sky was not decoration to them. It was not just scenery. It was a living system, a calendar, a map of meaning that shaped every aspect of how they understood time and reality. For the people of Göbekli Tepe, the stars were everything. They had no artificial light. When the sun went down, the dark was complete, not the partial dark we know, softened by the distant glow of cities, but a total immersive dark in which the Milky Way blazed, like something impossible, like a river of light poured across the sky in a gesture of impossible generosity. Every night, every clear night, which in this dry, semi-arid landscape was most nights, they watched those stars from birth to death. They knew them the way we know the streets of our neighbourhoods, the way we know the faces of people we have loved for years. They knew which stars rose just before dawn in summer and which set just after sunset in winter. They knew the patterns and the cycles and the slow, slow procession, the wobble of the earth that moved the stars just slightly from generation to generation, so that the sky of your great-grandmother's lifetime was almost but not quite the same sky as yours. One star in particular has attracted attention in connection with Göbekli Tepe. Sirius, the brightest star in the night sky, part of the constellation Canis Major, the Great Dog. Sirius rises with the sun in midsummer, what the ancient Egyptians, thousands of years later, would call the heliacal rising of Sirius, and its appearance on the horizon marked the coming of the annual Nile flood, which was the basis of Egyptian civilization. Sirius was a star of enormous importance across many ancient cultures. Some researchers believe that certain enclosures at Göbekli Tepe were aligned with the heliacal rising of Sirius at the time of the site's construction. This is still debated, and the astronomical alignments at Göbekli Tepe are complex and not fully agreed upon. But the idea that these people were using their monuments to mark and honour the movements of the sky is almost certainly correct. Think about what that means. They were building a calendar in stone, not a simple practical calendar, though it may have had practical uses, for marking the seasons, for coordinating gatherings, for timing the harvest of wild plants. But also a sacred calendar, a map of the relationship between the earth and the sky, rendered in enormous limestone and intended to last. They wanted future generations, their children, their grandchildren, the grandchildren of their grandchildren, to be able to stand in these enclosures and look through stone at the sky, and know where they were in time, know what season it was, what the sky was doing, what that meant for the world below. There is a tenderness in that, the act of building something for the people who come after you, so that they will not be lost, so that they will have a fixed point from which to orient themselves in the enormous flow of time. Parents do this for children. Communities do this for future generations. It is an act of love, in a very deep sense, the love that says, I will not be here when you need this, but I will leave it for you anyway. I will leave a way for you to know where you are. The stones of Göbekli Tepe were left for the future. They just waited a little longer than anyone expected. 12,000 years is a long time to wait for the right people to come and read the message. But here we are, reading it, in our own slow, incomplete, wandering way. Let the stars be part of your darkness tonight. Even if you cannot see them from where you are, even if the ceiling is above you and the walls are close, the stars are still there, the same stars that blazed over Göbekli Tepe 12,000 years ago, a little moved in the sky, a little changed in their arrangements, but still burning, still sending their old light down through the dark. That light left some of those stars before Göbekli Tepe was built. It has been travelling through space all this time, and tonight it reached you. You are receiving a message that is older than the hill. Let that be a comfort. Chapter 8. Stone that speaks without words. There is an enclosure at Göbekli Tepe that archaeologists call Enclosure D. It is one of the largest and in many ways the most remarkable. Its two central pillars are the tallest at the site. One of them, on its narrow side, has a carving that stops many people in their tracks when they first see it. A human figure. Not an animal. A human being. Simplified, reduced to the essential lines of a body and profile, but unmistakably human. The figure appears to be falling or lying down. Some researchers have interpreted it as a depiction of a dead person or a person in the act of dying. Others have seen it differently, as a figure in a ritual posture, a dancer, a dreamer. It is a small carving on a very large pillar. You might miss it if you were not looking, but once you see it, it stays with you. Because it is a human being, carved by a human being 12,000 years ago on a stone that is still standing. It is one of the oldest representations of a human figure in a narrative context that we have ever found, and it is looking out from the stone into a space that was used for thousands of years, for purposes we can only begin to imagine. What was this person doing in the carving? What were they meant to represent? Were they a specific person, someone important, someone lost, someone whose story the community needed to tell? Or were they an archetypal figure, the human being in general, placed here as a statement? We are here. We exist. We are part of this world of animals and stars and stone. We will never know, but we can feel the intention behind it. The care with which that small figure was rendered, the decision to put a human being on this particular pillar, in this particular place, in the most important enclosure of the site. It is not an accidental inclusion. It is a statement. And statements, even in languages we cannot read, carry emotion. They carry the weight of whoever made them. And the weight here, across 12,000 years, still arrives, still lands, still makes you feel something if you stand in front of it long enough in the quiet. The person who carved that figure is gone beyond all finding. No name, no face, no story that has survived. But the act of carving is still here. The intention is still here. The reach across time, the desire to leave a mark, to say something, to be part of the story of the place, that is still here. All art is a form of reaching. Every painting, every poem, every song, every carved line on a piece of stone, it is a hand reaching out of the present moment toward whatever future there might be, saying, I was here, I felt something. I wanted you to know. The hand that carved the falling figure at Göbekli Tepe was reaching toward us. Across 12,000 years, it finds us. Here, in the dark, in the quiet, at the end of a day, it finds us. Let that land gently, not with the weight of grief or the sting of time's passing, with the warmth of connection, the quiet astonishment of being found across such a vast distance. You are part of this story, not as a scholar, not as a visitor to a museum, as a human being sitting in the same long line of human beings that stretches all the way back to that figure on the stone. The same animal, with the same heart, the same reaching need to make meaning and be seen and leave something behind. The same reaching, the same being found. Chapter 9. The World Around the Hill. While Göbekli Tepe was being built and used, the rest of the world was also moving, slowly, in the way that worlds move, not all at once, not with a clean announcement, but in a gradual, overlapping, imprecise way that only becomes clear in hindsight. The agricultural revolution was stirring. In the hills and valleys surrounding Göbekli Tepe, sometimes within sight of the hill itself, the first tentative experiments with cultivated plants were beginning. Wild einkorn wheat grew abundantly in this region, and the genetic analysis of modern domesticated wheat has shown that it descends from a wild population that lived right here. In the Karada mountain range just a few kilometres from the site, this is not a coincidence that archaeologists take lightly. The oldest known ancestor of our modern bred wheat was growing on the hillsides that surrounded the world's oldest known temple. The two things, the sacred monument and the first farmed grain, were neighbours, and so the question becomes very live. Which came first? Did people come to this sacred place, begin to settle nearby to support the ongoing activities there, and then start cultivating the wild grains that grew conveniently nearby? Or were the grains being cultivated first, and the prosperity and the surplus that came from that cultivation then funding the great building project? The dating suggests it was the former. The earliest phases of Göbekli Tepe seem to predate reliable evidence of local grain cultivation by a meaningful margin. The temple, or something like it, came first. And if that is true, it is a quiet revolution in how we understand ourselves. We did not invent civilization so that we could then go build temples. We built temples, or something like them, gathering places, sacred centres, and in the gathering, in the settling nearby, in the community that formed around the shared sacred project, we invented the conditions that made civilization possible. The sacred impulse came before the agricultural impulse. The need to gather and acknowledge something larger than ourselves came before the need to store grain for the winter. That is a profound and beautiful thought. It says something about what we are at the most fundamental level. We are not primarily economic creatures who then, having secured our material needs, turn to higher things. We are primarily meaning-seeking creatures who organise our material lives around our meanings. The temple first, then the farm, the gathering first, then the city, the sacred first, then everything else. Of course, the reality was messier than any clean thesis can capture. The transition was gradual and regional and involved enormous variation across different communities and landscapes. Nothing in human history happens in a single clear step. It all overlaps and tangles and proceeds in fits and starts. But the broad pattern, suggested by Göbekli Tepe and supported by other evidence from the region, is striking. And it aligns with something we can feel in ourselves, if we are honest. We do not live by bread alone. We never have. Even at the most basic material level of survival, we have always also needed story. Needed ritual. Needed a place where the ordinary world could become, for a moment, transparent, where you could see through the surface of daily life to whatever lies underneath it, or above, it or beyond it. We have always needed the hill. Let that be the last thought of this chapter. Let it rest in you, soft and unhurried. You are not reading a textbook. You are not taking a test. You are just resting inside a story about who we are and where we come from. And everything in that story is pointed gently toward one thing: rest. The long-earned rest of a creature who has been searching for a very long time and has, for this moment, found a place to be still. The hill is here. You are here. That is enough. Chapter 10. The Silence Between the Stones. There is something that never quite makes it into the academic papers and the archaeological reports, but that anyone who has visited Göbekli Tepe mentions, in one way or another, when they try to describe the experience. The silence. Not the ordinary silence of a quiet room, not the silence of a library or an empty church. Something older and wider than that. The silence that comes from standing in a place that has witnessed 12,000 years of human presence and absence, 12,000 years of wind and rain and the long turning of the seasons, and is somehow still here, still intact, still holding its essential shape. It is the silence of very deep time, and in that silence you become aware of your own smallness, not painfully, not with the sharp sting of ego dissolution, but gently, the way you become aware of how small a single candle flame is when you carry it outside on a clear night. Small but real, small but burning, small but casting a little circle of light. You are small in time. You have a few decades if you are fortunate, 100 years at the very outside. A blink in the scale of what Göbekli Tepe has witnessed. But that blink is real. Your life is real. Your loves and your losses, your quiet mornings and your hard days, your moments of unexpected beauty and your long stretches of ordinary time. All of it is real. And all of it matters, not in spite of being small and brief, but precisely because of it. The people who built Göbekli Tepe had the same span, a few decades, and then gone. They did not know if anyone would ever find what they built. They did not know if the stones would survive. They did not know that 12,000 years later, the stone circles would still be standing, that their carved animals would still be recognizable, that their work would shake. The foundations of how a whole species understood its own origins. They just built it anyway. They just put in the work, and carved with care, and gathered in ceremony, and buried it with love when the time came. They did not need to know the outcome to do the thing, and neither do you. Whatever you are building, in your life, in your relationships, in whatever quiet work you pour yourself into, you do not need to know how it ends. You do not need to know who will find it, or when, or what they will make of it. Just build with care. Just carve with attention. Just bury it gently when the time comes. The silence between the stones holds all of this. It holds all the unnamed builders, all the unnamed lives, all the unnamed efforts that went into making this place. It holds them without judgment, without preference, without any requirement that they be remembered or recognized. It holds them simply, quietly, the way the earth holds everything in the end. And it holds you too. Right now, tonight, in your particular darkness with your particular weight of days, you are held. By the same patience that holds the stone circles, by the same quiet that has been breathing in and out of Göbekli Tepe for 12,000 years. Let it hold you. You do not have to hold yourself so tightly. Let go just a little more. Let the weight of your body go fully into whatever is beneath you. Let your breath go fully out, and then let it come back on its own, without any effort from you. It knows how. It has always known how. The night is deeper now. Whatever hour it is where you are, the world outside has gotten quieter. The sounds of the day have mostly fallen away. Maybe there is a distant hum of something. A fan, a breeze through a window left slightly open, the far-off movement of a city settling into its nighttime rhythm. But mostly, there is quiet. And in that quiet, the story is still here. The way a river waits for you when you return to it after a long absence. It does not ask where you have been. It does not ask how long you were gone. It simply continues, as it always has, in its own patient direction. We are going deeper into the mystery tonight. We have stood inside the stone circles. We have looked at the carved animals, the pillar beings with their carved arms and their stone clothing. We have thought about the people who built this place, their hands, their knowledge, their deep understanding of stone and stars, and the behaviour of wild things. We have sat with the idea that the sacred impulse may have come before the agricultural one, that the temple may have come before the farm. Now we are going to move toward the strangest part of the story, the burial. But we will arrive there slowly. There are things to see and feel along the way. Get comfortable. Let your body find its final resting position for the night, the one that feels most like where you want to stay. Let your muscles go soft. Let your jaw unclench. Let your hands open. We are going deeper. Chapter 11. The World That Was Changing. To understand why Göbekli Tepe was eventually buried, we need to understand the world that was changing around it. Because the world was changing. Dramatically, irreversibly, in ways that would transform human life on this planet forever. The agricultural revolution was arriving. Not in a single moment, not with a declaration or an announcement. It arrived the way all the deepest changes arrive, slowly, quietly, in the accumulation of small decisions made by ordinary people going about their ordinary lives. Someone noticed that the wild einkorn wheat grew more densely in certain places. Someone noticed that scattering grain near the camp meant that grain came up near the camp the following season. Someone noticed that some plants produced more seeds than others, and that saving those seeds and planting them gave a better harvest. These observations, made over generations, across many communities, in many different landscapes simultaneously, were the seeds, in both the literal and figurative sense, of everything that followed. Within a few thousand years of the earliest phases of Göbekli Tepe, the people of this region were farming. Not exclusively. They were still hunting, still gathering, still moving through the landscape in the old ways during certain seasons. But increasingly, the centre of gravity of their lives was shifting towards settled places, toward fields that needed tending, toward villages of mud brick houses, toward the permanent rooted life that farming requires. And this shift changed everything, including, perhaps, what Göbekli Tepe meant to them. Think about it from the inside. You are a person living through this transition. Your grandparents were primarily hunter-gatherers, moving with the seasons, knowing the landscape intimately, organising their spiritual life around the great gathering places, like the hill with the stone circles. Your parents began to experiment with cultivation, still moving but with a home base, a place to return to, a small field of grain that needed watching. And you live in a village, a real village, with walls and roofs and neighbours you see every day, not just in the seasonal gathering seasons. You have grain stored in clay jars. You have animals, goats perhaps, or the first domesticated cattle that live alongside you, that you feed and tend and that give you milk, and eventually meet. Your world is fundamentally different from your grandparents' world, and the old places, the sacred hills, the stone circles built for a people in motion, a people organised around the great seasonal gatherings, what do those places mean now? Maybe they begin to mean something different. Or maybe they begin to feel like they belong to a different world. A world that is fading. A world that your children will know only as stories told by the very old. Maybe the time comes when you look at the hill and understand, in your bones, that its season is passing. And you face a choice. You can leave it. Walk away. Let the wind and the rain have it. Let the stones topple and the carvings erode. Let the enclosures fill slowly with wind-blown dust and become, over centuries, unrecognisable. Or you can do something else. You can bury it. You can treat it not as a ruin, but as a resting place. Not as something that has failed or become obsolete, but as something that has completed its purpose and deserves to be laid down with the same care and intention with which it was raised. You can give it the burial it deserves. That, as far as we can tell, is what they chose. Let the weight of that choice settle over you. The extraordinary tenderness of it, the sense of a community that understood endings as well as beginnings, that knew how to close a chapter with grace, that chose to honour what was passing rather than simply turn away from it. We do not do this well, as a species, most of the time. We tend to abandon our old things or destroy them or build over them without thought. We tend to treat the past as simply what we are moving away from. But the people of Göbekli Tepe, in their slow, deliberate burial of the enclosures, were doing something different. They were saying, this mattered. This still matters. And because it matters, we will not leave it to the wind. We will tuck it in. We will place it gently into the earth, the way you place something precious into a box and close the lid carefully, knowing that what is inside will keep. And it kept. For 12,000 years it kept. Chapter 12. How they buried it. The burial of Göbekli Tepe was not a single event. It was not done all at once, by one generation, on one decided day. It was a process that unfolded over time, over centuries possibly, as the enclosures were gradually filled. The filling material is itself deeply interesting. It is not just soil. It is not just the wind-blown accumulation of time. It is a deliberate mixture. Rubble, yes, but also broken flint tools, animal bones, small stone vessels, fragments of carved stone. All the material of the life that had been lived there. It is as if the people who did the filling were gathering up the residue of the ceremonies, the used tools, the eaten bones, the broken vessels, and including them in the burial, sending them down with the pillars into the earth as part of the same offering. There is a parallel here to burial practices in many cultures. The idea that the dead should not go alone into whatever comes next. That they should be accompanied by the things that defined their life, by the objects and materials that held meaning for them. Wrapped in those meanings, sent forward. The enclosures were buried with their meanings intact, with the bones of the animals that had been eaten in ceremony, with the tools that had been used in building and carving, with the fragments of the life that had been lived in the circles of standing stone. All of it tucked in together, and then, over the buried circles, new circles were sometimes built. The hill kept growing, each phase of building layered over the previous, like the rings of a tree, marking time in a way that archaeologists can now read, layer by layer, as they dig carefully downward. Through centuries, the deeper you go, the older it is. And the older it is, in many cases the more sophisticated and elaborate the stonework seems to be. The earliest enclosures, the deepest ones, the oldest, have some of the largest pillars, some of the most detailed carvings. This is counterintuitive to us. We tend to assume that things get more sophisticated over time, that the oldest things are the simplest, and the newer things are the most refined. But at Göbekli Tepe, it seems to have gone in a different direction. The earliest builders, working at the height of the site's significance and communal energy, created the most ambitious work. And as time went on, as the world changed and the gathering energies shifted toward the new farming villages, the later enclosures were somewhat smaller, somewhat simpler. As if the intensity was in the beginning, as if the first people who came to this hill brought the full force of their vision with them, and what came after was beautiful but more modest, the continuation of a tradition whose peak moment had already passed. The fullest flowering was at the start. There is something in that to think about, not sadly, but with simple recognition. Everything has its moment of fullest expression. Every river has its widest stretch. Every fire has its brightest point. Göbekli Tepe's brightest point was its beginning, and its burial was its completion. Let the image form gently in your mind. Layers of time pressing down into the hill. The oldest, most magnificent work at the deepest level, perfectly preserved in its blanket of dry limestone rubble. Above it, the later work, smaller but still careful. Above that, the slower accumulation of centuries without human hands, wind-blown soil, animal burrows, the slow patient work of roots and rain and time, and above all of it, the grass of the hillside. The ordinary surface of the world, hiding everything, keeping everything. For 12,000 years, breathe slowly. There is something almost unbearably beautiful about this, if you let yourself feel it. The patience of it, the sheer scale of the keeping, the way the earth took in this human creation and held it, perfectly, without any instruction to do so, without any guardian, without any priesthood maintaining the site, without any living memory of what lay beneath, just the earth, doing what the earth does, holding, preserving, keeping, until the right moment. Until a German archaeologist stood on a hillside in 1994 and thought, something is here. Chapter 13. The Moment of Discovery. Klaus Schmidt was 38 years old when he visited Göbekli Tepe for the first time. He had been working in Turkey for years, excavating other Neolithic sites in the region, developing a detailed understanding of what the pre-pottery Neolithic looked like. What its physical signatures were, the kinds of stone tools people used, the kinds of structures they built, the patterns of their settlement. He came to this hill having read the earlier survey notes. The University of Chicago team from the 1960s had recorded it as a possible medieval or Byzantine site. A few small test trenches had been dug at some point, and nothing remarkable had been found. Schmidt arrived and walked the surface. He looked at the shape of the hill. He looked at the flint scatters on the surface, the characteristic types of stone tools that indicated a Neolithic presence. He looked at a few stone fragments visible in eroded areas of the slope. And something in him understood. Later, he would describe it as a kind of recognition, not supernatural. He was a careful, empirical scientist, but the trained intuition of someone who had spent years reading landscapes, who had developed a feel for how sites present themselves, who knew what to look for and had learned to trust his reading of the signs. He said in various interviews over the years, "I knew immediately that this was not medieval. I knew it was much older. And I knew it was very large." He went back the following year with funding and a team and began to excavate. The first pillar they uncovered confirmed everything. It was enormous. It was carved. It was T-shaped. And it was dated by the sediment around it and by comparative analysis of the stone tools found with it to approximately 10,000 BC. 12,000 years ago. The date alone was staggering, but what made it truly world-altering was the combination, this date, and this complexity, and this scale, all together. Monumental, symbolic, carefully planned architecture from before the Neolithic Revolution had taken full hold, from before pottery, from before the wheel, from before writing, from before anything that we had assumed was a prerequisite for this kind of building. It rewrote the timeline. It rewrote the story. And Klaus Schmidt spent the rest of his life uncovering it, season by season, year by year, until his death in 2014. he never stopped being astonished by it. In interviews from late in his life, he still spoke about Göbekli Tepe, with a wonder that had not dimmed over 20 years of excavation. Some places keep giving. Some questions keep deepening, rather than resolving. Some discoveries open the door to a room that turns out to be much larger than anyone expected, and you can spend a lifetime walking through that room and still not reach the far. Wall. Göbekli Tepe was that kind of discovery for Schmidt, and in a way it is that kind of discovery for all of us. The more we learn about it, the more questions it generates. The more carefully we excavate, the more we realise how much is still unknown. That is not a frustration. Or at least, it does not have to be. It can be a gift. The gift of a mystery that stays alive. A question that does not collapse into a simple answer, but keeps opening, keeps growing, keeps pointing towards something that remains, gloriously, just out of full reach. Some of the best things in life are like that. Some questions are worth keeping, not solving. Let this one be among them. The question of Göbekli Tepe. What it was for, what they felt there, what was said in those stone circles under the pre-dawn sky. Keep the question. Hold it lightly. Let it live in you, not as an itch to be scratched, but as a small warm light. It is good to have a mystery that is gentle. Chapter 14. The animals again. I want to come back to the animals one more time, because I have been thinking about them, even as we have moved through chapters about the burial and the discovery and the great slow shift toward farming. The animals keep coming back. The foxes, the vultures, the scorpions, the snakes, the cranes with their long curved necks, the aurochs with their massive shoulders. They are everywhere at Göbekli Tepe, not as a uniform background decoration, but as a specific, chosen, intentional presence. Each enclosure has its own combination of animals. Each pillar makes its own statement about the creatures it presents. Some researchers have proposed that different enclosures may have belonged to different clans or family groups, that each community who participated in the building of Göbekli Tepe had its own animal symbols, its own totemic creatures, and carved them on its own designated pillars in its own designated enclosure. If this is true, then Göbekli Tepe was not just a single community's sacred place. It was a meeting ground for multiple groups, each bringing their own identity, their own symbols, their own way of understanding the world, and placing all of that in. Relationship with the others, inside the same sacred geography. A place where different peoples came with their different animals and stood together in the same circle. There is something extraordinary about that. If you let yourself feel it fully, different groups, different territories, different totems and stories and ways of being human. And yet here, in this place, gathered around these pillars, sharing these ceremonies and these feasts, a shared identity that transcended the individual groups, a shared humanity held together by a shared sacred centre. We have been trying to build that ever since. Every city that draws people from different origins. Every market where strangers trade and speak and discover their common needs. Every celebration that invites all kinds of people to stand in the same circle. We keep trying to do what Göbekli Tepe did. To find the place and the symbols and the ceremonies that say, we are different from each other in many ways, and yet here, in this space, we are together. Here, we recognise something in each other. Here, we are more than our differences. The Fox clan and the Vulture clan, standing in the same stone circle under the same turning stars, the thought of it makes the chest a little softer, doesn't it? The oldest known gathering of different peoples around a shared sacred centre on a hill in ancient Turkey 12,000 years ago, still teaching us something, still pointing towards something we have not yet fully learned. Let the animals be with you now. Not as facts, not as archaeological artefacts, but as presences. The patient fox, the circling vulture. The slow coiling snake. The long-necked crane lifting from the river's edge into the pale morning sky. Let them be part of the company you keep tonight. As you rest, they have been keeping company with sleeping humans for a very long time. They know how. Now, before we move into the next part of our journey, let this moment be a small resting point. Not a full stopping, the story is not done, and there is still so much to explore. But a pause. A breath between chapters, like the silence between musical phrases that gives the notes their meaning. Notice how your body feels right now. Notice the quality of your breathing, whether it has grown slower and softer over the course of the story. Notice whether the busy surface of your mind has gone a little quieter, whether the thoughts that crowd the daytime hours have receded somewhat, making room for the slow current of images and ideas that comes when the mind begins to let go. You might be feeling the particular quality of late-night consciousness, that state where you are not quite asleep but not quite fully awake, where the edges between things go soft, where the logical separating part of the mind grows quieter and something more associative and dreamy comes forward. That is a good state, a healthy, natural state, the state in which dreams begin. If you're already there, wonderful. If you are still awake and listening, that is also wonderful. Either way, the story is here for you. Imagine, if you will, the hill at night, not in the ancient past this time, just now. Just this night. The hilltop is dark. The protective shelters built by the archaeologists are dark shapes against the sky. The stone pillars inside those shelters are standing in their circles as they have stood for 12,000 years in a darkness that is occasionally broken by our researchers. Flashlight, by the sweep of car headlights on a distant road, by the travelling light of a satellite passing overhead. The stars above the hill are dense and bright. The carved fox on its pillar is still. The carved snake is still. The tall T-shaped beings stand in their circle, arms carved, hands pointing gently forward, watching whatever it is that stone beings watch when no living eyes are present. The hill breathes in the slow way that old things breathe, not with lungs, but with the long rhythm of seasons and centuries. Summer heat, winter cold. Rain and drought, the grass on the surface growing and dying and growing again, year after year, a green fire that renews itself in an endless loop. Below the surface, deep in the dry dark, the oldest enclosures are perfect. Patient. Waiting, in the way that the past always waits, not anxiously, not urgently, but with the undemanding patience of something that has no need for anything to be different than. It is. The past is always just as it was. It will always have been. And that, in its way, is a kind of comfort. Whatever happened at Göbekli Tepe, whatever ceremonies, whatever gatherings, whatever moments of individual human beauty and community and awe, all of that happened. It cannot unhappen. It is written into the fabric of what has been, permanent and complete, as real as anything that is happening right now. Those people gathered there. Those ceremonies took place. Those fires burned under those stars. Those voices rose and fell in whatever songs or prayers they made. All of it happened. All of it is real. The fact that we cannot know the details does not diminish the reality of it. The fact that no written record survives, no named individual, no photograph or recording, none of that erases the fact that it was real as your own life, as real as this breath, as real as the weight of your body in the soft dark of tonight. It happened. And some residue of it, some quality, some vibration, some message encoded in carved stone and patient earth, has reached us here, tonight, in the quiet. Chapter 15. The Things We Do Not Know. There is a kind of intellectual honesty that the best archaeology practices, and it is worth spending a moment with it. We do not know what Göbekli Tepe was for. Not fully, not certainly. We have hypotheses: temple, gathering place, astronomical observatory, ceremonial feasting site, all of the above. We have evidence that points in various directions. We have the physical remains of the structures, the carvings, the animal bones, the stone tools. We have the dates established through careful scientific methods. But we do not have the meaning. Not from the inside. We are reading a text in a language we do not speak. And we are doing our best, and some of our readings are likely close to correct, and others are surely wrong in ways we cannot yet recognise. The people who built Göbekli Tepe would probably be astonished, and possibly amused or moved or troubled by some of our interpretations. They might recognise something in what we have said, and feel surprised that it came through across such a distance. And they might look at other things we have said and think, no, that is not it at all. That is not what we meant. We will never have that conversation, and yet the conversation is happening, in a sense. Every archaeologist who brushes the soil from a carved stone and asks, "What is this?" Every researcher who sits with a photograph of the Fox Pillar and tries to think their way into what it meant, they are in conversation with the past. Imperfectly. Partially. With the humility, if they are good, of knowing they are working with incomplete information. But in conversation. And perhaps that is the right model for how we relate to deep time, not as an authority to be decoded, but as a conversation partner to be listened to. Imperfectly heard, never fully understood, but genuinely in dialogue. We bring our questions to the past, and the past responds with what it has, the physical, the carved, the buried, and from that exchange, something emerges that is neither our invention nor a simple transmission, but something in between. A meeting, a slow, imperfect, beautiful meeting across an enormous distance. That is what Göbekli Tepe is. And that is what this story is, tonight. A meeting, you in your particular body, in your particular night, bringing your particular self to this ancient place. And the place, patient and full and silent, offering what it has to offer, which is not certainty, but presence. Not answers, but the quality of questions that open rather than close. Let the not knowing be comfortable tonight. Let uncertainty be soft, the way the dark around you is soft. We do not need to understand everything to be moved by it. We do not need to decode the fox to feel something when we look at its carved outline on the pale stone. We do not need to know what prayers were spoken in the enclosures to feel something when we stand in them, or imagine standing in them, or imagine the people who stood in them 12,000 years ago. The feeling is real. The connection is real. The mystery does not diminish it, it deepens it. A mystery that you can rest inside, like a warm room on a cold night, like the dark space between one breath and the next, where for just a moment everything is completely still. Something has shifted in the night. You can feel it, even with your eyes closed. The quality of the dark has changed slightly. The world has moved a little further into the deep hours, that part of the night that belongs fully to sleep, that exists between the last sounds of evening and the first sounds of morning. The in-between time. This is the hour that has always belonged to the sacred, the hour when ancient people believed the boundary between the ordinary world and whatever lies beyond it becomes thinnest. When the veil, as some traditions call it, grows soft. The hill understands this hour. The carved fox on its limestone pillar understands this hour. And so, in a quiet way, do you. Welcome to the fourth part of our journey. We have come a long way together. We have walked across the early morning landscape to the stone circles. We have looked at the carved animals and the pillar beings with their stone arms and their stone clothing. we have thought about the people who built this place, their hands, their stars, their deep and intricate knowledge of a world we have mostly forgotten how to read. We have moved through the slow drama of the agricultural revolution, and we have stood at the edge of the burial, that extraordinary, tender, deliberate act of laying the whole. Placed down into the earth like something precious into a box, now we are going deeper into the reflection. The story is beginning to turn inward, the way a long river near the sea begins to widen and slow. Less rushing, more spreading, more depth in every direction. There is still much to explore, but the energy is different now. Slower, softer, more like the feeling of sitting by a window at dusk, watching the light change, thinking thoughts that have no particular urgency and no particular destination. Let your body feel that. Let the urgency go out of everything. We are in the wide, slow part of the river now. Chapter 16. What the burial tells us. The burial of Göbekli Tepe is in some ways the most interesting thing about it. More interesting even than the pillars themselves. More interesting than the carvings, or the astronomical alignments, or the evidence of feasting. Because the burial is a choice, and choices tell us things that objects cannot. Objects tell us what people made. Choices tell us what people valued, what they believed, how they understood the relationship between time and meaning and the things we leave behind. The people who buried Göbekli Tepe could have walked away. Many sacred sites throughout history have been abandoned, left to the elements, to decay, to the slow patient erasure of rain and wind and root and time. In many parts of the world, when a sacred place lost its function, when the community that maintained it moved on or changed or died, the place simply emptied and began its long return to undifferentiated landscape. There is no judgment in that. It is a natural process. Things are built, and then they are left, and then they are reclaimed by the earth. But Göbekli Tepe was not left. It was filled, carefully, deliberately, with the material of its own life, the bones, the tools, the fragments of stone and ceremony. Every time I return to this fact, I find something new in it. The act of burial, in human cultures across the world and across time, carries a consistent set of meanings. It says this mattered. It says, I will not let this become nothing. It says, by placing this in the earth, I am not destroying it, I am protecting it, giving it to the keeping of something larger and more permanent than any human hand. The earth as vault. The earth as memory. When we bury our dead, we are doing something that goes far beyond sanitation or practicality. We are making a statement about what a life was worth. We are saying, this person existed, and that existence had weight, and we will mark it, and the earth will hold the mark. The people who buried Göbekli Tepe were making the same statement about a place. This place existed. It had weight. It had meaning. And rather than let that meaning disperse into nothing, we will mark it, and the earth will hold the mark. And the earth did hold it. That is the part that quietly takes your breath away, if you let it. The earth held the mark for 12,000 years, perfectly, without anyone asking it to, without any maintenance, any guardianship, any living memory of what lay inside. The dry limestone sediment of this particular region happened to be exactly the right preservation environment: low moisture, stable temperature, chemically neutral. The physical conditions were as if designed for the keeping of carved stone, as if the earth agreed, as if the earth said, yes, I will hold this, I understand what you are asking, leave it with me. And it kept its word. For 12,000 years. Let the image of that keeping rest in your chest for a moment, the earth, holding something precious and important, without being asked to remember, without needing any reminder. Just holding. Faithfully, the way certain things are held that we cannot fully explain. the way a melody can stay in you for years without effort, the way the memory of a beloved person can be suddenly, perfectly present decades after they are gone, the way certain places feel charged with something that happened there long ago, even if no one alive remembers what it was. The earth has a memory. It is not like our memory. It does not narrate or explain, it just holds. It preserves the shape of things. It keeps the bones and the stones and the carved lines exactly as they were until someone comes to look. And someone came to look. And here we are tonight, the beneficiaries of both the burial and the keeping. Chapter 17. The layers of time. One of the things that makes Göbekli Tepe so rich for researchers and so endlessly fascinating to think about is that it is not a single moment frozen in time. It is a layered place, a place that accumulated over centuries, each layer deposited by human hands on top of the previous one. When archaeologists dig at Göbekli Tepe, they are not uncovering a single event. They are uncovering a sequence of events, a long conversation that a community, or many communities, had with this sacred landscape over an enormous span of time. The oldest layers, layer the third, in the archaeological naming, date to approximately 10,000 BC or earlier. These are the enclosures with the tallest pillars, the most elaborate carvings, the most ambitious architecture. The great T-shaped beings in enclosures A, B, C and D belong to this earliest period. Above those, slightly younger, are the layer 2 enclosures, smaller, somewhat simpler, but still clearly part of the same tradition. Still using the T-shaped pillars. Still filling the surfaces with animals. Still organised around the same basic spatial concept, the 2 tall central pillars surrounded by a ring of smaller ones. And then, eventually, the final burial. The filling. The hill that grew and then became, to all outward appearances, just a hill. What this layering tells us is that Göbekli Tepe was not a single inspiration, built in a single generation and then abandoned. It was a living tradition, a practice that was renewed and continued and adapted over hundreds, possibly thousands of years. Generations of people came to this hill and added to what was already there. They built new enclosures alongside the old. They maintained the existing ones. They came in the ceremonial seasons, they gathered and feasted and worked and prayed. And then they went back to their lives, carrying the experience of the sacred hill with them. And when the tradition finally ended, when the world had changed enough that the old gathering no longer made sense in the old way, they buried it all together. Not just the last phase, all of it. They pulled the whole long tradition into the earth in one final act of honouring. All the layers, all the generations, all the seasons of gathering and ceremony and shared work and shared meaning, all of it tucked in together. There is something in this that speaks to the nature of tradition itself. The way traditions accumulate meaning over time, each generation adding its own experience to the inherited shape. The way coral reefs grow, each new layer living on the bones of what came before. The way a family story deepens across generations, gathering new details and new resonances while keeping the essential shape. Göbekli Tepe is a layered thing, a coral reef of human meaning, and we have only excavated a fraction of it. The deeper layers, the oldest, most magnificent enclosures, are still largely unexcavated. They sit in the dark below, perfectly preserved, waiting for future archaeologists with better tools, with technologies we have not invented yet, with methods of analysis that do not yet exist. In a way, the burial has become a gift to the future, not just to the present. The people who filled those enclosures could not have known that their careful burial would preserve the site for 12,000 years. They could not have known about archaeology, or radiocarbon dating, or ground-penetrating radar. They were acting from within their own understanding, their own values, their own sense of what this place deserved. But the result, as if by some long patience of the universe, is that the site is accessible to us, and will be even more accessible to those who come after us. The burial that was meant as an ending has become a kind of generosity toward all the future people who would come to wonder. Let that thought drift through you. The unintended generosity of careful acts, the way a choice made in love, for whatever reason, in whatever framework of understanding, can ripple forward in time, benefiting people who were not yet born in ways that were not imagined. The careful action is never wasted. Even when you cannot see where it goes, even when you will never know who it reaches, the careful, loving action goes forward into time like a stone dropped into a pool. You do not see all the rings it makes, you only see the first few, but they continue, spreading out, long after you have looked away. The people who buried Göbekli Tepe dropped a stone into the pool of time, and the rings are still spreading. We are one of the rings. Chapter 18. What it means for us. Now I want to sit with you in a slightly different kind of thought. Not archaeological, not historical, more personal. More like the thoughts you have in the very late night, when the analytical mind has quieted and something more direct and feeling-based comes forward. What does Göbekli Tepe mean for us? Not for human history in the abstract. For us, personally. For the people who are alive right now, who are building their own lives in the middle of their own great transitions, their own bewildering speeds of change. We are living through a revolution at least as dramatic as the agricultural revolution. The digital revolution, the shift from a world organised around physical presence and local community to a world organised around networked connection and global reach. The shift from a world where most human experience was rooted in a specific place, a specific landscape, a specific community of known faces, to a world where the self is distributed, diffused, potentially connected to anyone everywhere, and yet sometimes deeply lonely in the immediate physical sense. The people of Göbekli Tepe were at the hinge of the agricultural revolution. They lived in the last generations of the old world and the first generations of the new. They felt the ground shifting under the very definition of what it meant to be human, what it meant to live a human life. And they built a place that said, here. In all this change, here. A fixed point. A gathering place. A space where the ancient and the new can coexist, where the sacred can be honoured even as the material world transforms beyond recognition. They needed a centre. And they built one. Do we need the same thing? I think we do. I think the need for a centre, for a place, physical or otherwise, that is set apart from the rush of ordinary life, where something deeper and slower can be acknowledged, is not a historical need that belonged to hunter-gatherers and has since been outgrown. I think it is a permanent human need, a structural feature of what we are, like our need for sleep, or for touch, or for the faces of people we love. We need the sacred centre. We need the place where the ordinary world becomes temporarily transparent and something else can be seen. And the remarkable thing about the story of Göbekli Tepe is that it tells us this need is not a weakness. It is not a failure to be rational, or a regression to something primitive. It is the oldest and deepest organising impulse of our species. The one that came before farming, before cities, before writing, before everything we point to when we try to define what civilization is. The sacred centre came first. It is our oldest invention, and perhaps it is our most necessary one. Whatever form your own centre takes, a place in nature that makes you feel held, a practice that brings you into a different quality of presence, a relationship that carries more weight and more meaning than the daily traffic of life, a moment of genuine stillness in a day full of noise. Whatever form it takes, it is real. It is valid. It is 12,000 years old. At minimum, you are not doing something new when you seek that centre. You are doing something as old as humanity itself. You are going to the hill. Let that be a comfort. Whatever hill it is for you, whatever stone circle, whatever carved animal on whatever inner pillar of your own inner life, you are going to the hill. And the hill is always there. Now, in the quiet of this deep night, let something settle. Feel the length of time that has passed since Göbekli Tepe was built. Really feel it, not as a number. 12,000 years is just a number, too large to feel directly, but as a quality of depth. The way a very deep well feels different from a shallow one, even before you drop a stone in, even before you hear the splash. There is just a depth you can sense, a darkness that goes down and down and down. That is time, the depth of human time. And at the bottom of that depth, perfectly preserved in its dry limestone dark, the stone circles are standing, and at the surface of that depth, here in this particular night, you are breathing. You are the surface of all that depth. Everything that has ever happened, every human generation that has ever lived, every ceremony that has ever been held in every sacred circle, in every landscape, in every era. All of that is the depth of the well you are standing at the top of. You carry all of it, in some sense. Not as memory, you cannot consciously access any of it, except through stories like this one, but as inheritance, as the accumulated shape of what the human animal has become through all those generations of living and building and burying and beginning again. You are the newest version of something very old, and the old depth is in you, in your capacity for wonder, in your need for ceremony and gathering and sacred space, in the way you sometimes look at the sky and feel something you cannot name, in the way a particular piece of music can undo you completely, in the way the face of someone you love can be, on certain days, almost unbearably beautiful. All of that is the hill in you. The ancient, patient, deeply rooted human hill. Let it be felt tonight, just for a moment, before sleep closes over it. Let it be felt. Chapter 19. The animals return. I keep returning to the animals. Every time I think I have said everything there is to say about them, something else surfaces. Some new facet of what it means that these particular creatures were chosen, carved with such care, placed in these specific positions, on these specific pillars. Tonight I want to think about what the animals might represent in terms of a different kind of knowing, an ecological knowing, a relational knowing, the kind of knowing that comes from living closely with the natural world over many generations. The people of Göbekli Tepe were hunters. They knew the animals of their landscape the way most of us will never know anything, from the inside, from daily proximity, from the life and death relationship of predator and prey, from the careful, respectful attention that hunters across all traditions must bring to the animals they depend on. They knew how a fox moves, the particular flick of its body when it turns quickly, the way it holds its head when it is listening to something underground, the quality of its eyes, bright, quick, missing nothing. They knew how a vulture rides the thermal currents, how it circles without visible effort, rising on invisible columns of warm air, patient and wide-winged against the blue. They knew the sound a scorpion makes in dry leaf litter, the way a snake navigates across hot stone, the moment before an aurochs charges, the stillness, then the shift of weight, then the sudden enormous movement. They knew all of this the way you know the rhythms of your own body, not as learned information, but as lived understanding, as part of the fabric of their consciousness. And when they carved these animals into stone, they were not simply making representations, they were transferring that living knowledge into a permanent form. They were saying, this quality, this foxness, this vultureness, this snakeness matters, is real, deserves to be acknowledged and honoured and made permanent. It was a form of gratitude, and perhaps a form of recognition of the fact that the world is full of other kinds of minds, other kinds of awareness, other ways of being conscious and present in the world. The fox knows things you do not know. The vulture sees things you cannot see. The snake understands things about the earth that no human fully understands. By carving them, the builders of Göbekli Tepe were acknowledging that. Were bowing, in some sense, to the knowledge and awareness of other species. Were including them in the sacred. Were saying, we are not the only beings here who matter. We are not the centre of this world. We are one kind of mind among many. That is a profound and humble recognition. And in some ways, we have been moving away from it ever since the agricultural revolution. As we domesticated animals, as we built walls between ourselves and the wild, as we became increasingly urban and increasingly able to live without daily contact with the non-human world, we lost something of that recognition, something of that humility, that sense of being one species among many rather than the dominant species for whom all others exist. Göbekli Tepe, with its abundance of carved wild animals, is a reminder of the older understanding. We were part of the world, not apart from it. The fox was our kin, not our resource. The vulture was our teacher, not our nuisance. Let that older understanding breathe in you for a moment. The sense of belonging to a world that is full of other minds, other ways of knowing, other presences that are as real and as valid as your own. The world is alive in ways we have mostly stopped attending to. But the attention is still possible. Even from here, from the soft dark of a bedroom, from the warmth of a bed, from the middle of a thoroughly modern life, the attention is still possible. You can still feel the world around you as something that is alive and various and full of other kinds of awareness. The carved fox on its limestone pillar is an invitation to that attention, even now, even here. Chapter 20. The long aftermath. After Göbekli Tepe was buried, the world kept moving. The agricultural revolution that was stirring around its edges gradually became the defining fact of human life in the region. Farming villages grew into towns. Towns grew into the first cities. The cities of southern Mesopotamia, Uruk, Eridu, Ur, rose from the flat alluvial plains between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, built from mud brick, irrigated by elaborate canal systems organised by increasingly complex administrative structures. And with the cities came writing. The first writing we know of was not poetry. It was not prayer. It was not the attempt to capture something ineffable in permanent form. It was accounting. Lists of goods, records of transactions, the management of surplus grain in large administrative storehouses. The sacred impulse that had built Göbekli Tepe was now embedded in a vast apparatus of material management. But it never disappeared. The temples of Mesopotamia, the great ziggurats, those stepped pyramids that rose above the flat plain like mountains built by human hands, were in a direct line of descent from the stone circles of Göbekli Tepe. Not architecturally, necessarily, not in any direct physical continuity, but in impulse, in the deep human need for the sacred centre, the gathering place, the space where the ordinary world was set aside and something larger could be acknowledged. Every civilization builds its hill. Every civilization needs its centre. The ziggurats of Sumer, the temples of Egypt, the Acropolis of Athens, the great cathedrals of medieval Europe, the mosques and churches and synagogues and stupas and shrines of every tradition in every era and every landscape, all of them echo, in their different ways, the stone circles on the Potbelly Hill. The need that made Göbekli Tepe is the same need that made all of them, and that need is still alive. In every person who has ever stood in a place that felt charged with something beyond the ordinary, in every person who has ever felt, even briefly, that they were in the presence of something larger than themselves, something that was not threatening, but was in fact deeply reassuring, something that made the small self feel both smaller and more secure. That is the feeling of the sacred. It is very old, it is in you, and it is perhaps one of the most trustworthy parts of you. The part that knows, without being able to explain, that there is more to this world than what can be measured and counted and efficiently managed. That there is a depth to existence that resists all accounting. That there is something that the fox knows, and the vulture knows, and the turning stars know that we are only beginning to approach, even after 12,000 years of trying. Let that part of you be honoured tonight. The part that brought you to this story. The part that was drawn to the image of a buried hill in ancient Turkey, to the mystery of carved animals and standing stones, and a community that chose, at the end of their tradition, to lay it down with love rather than walk away. That part of you is your own sacred centre. It is worth knowing, it is worth returning to. And now, as we move toward the quietest part of the night, let me invite you into one final resting before we begin the last chapter of our journey. Let the images of the night gather around you like quiet company. The pale limestone hill in the early morning, the fox on its pillar, carved and patient, the tall T-shaped beings standing in their circle, watching with stone eyes that have seen 12,000 years of sky, the feasting bones pressed deep into the sediment, the careful hands of the builders pressing rubble gently into the enclosures they were laying to rest. The German archaeologist standing on the slope in 1994, feeling something he could not name, knowing only that it was here, that it was old, that it was important beyond all easy measure. Let all of these gather around you, softly, without weight or demand. Just company. Just the long human story, keeping you company in the dark. Your breath is slow, your body is heavy and at rest. The thoughts that race through the daytime are far away now, not gone. They will return when you need them, but for now they have retreated to whatever room they live in when they are not needed. And what is left is this: the quiet, the dark, the breath, the hill somewhere on the other side of the world, holding its secrets in the dry, patient dark. And you, connected to it, across time and distance and the entire span of human history, connected to it by the simple fact of being human, the same animal, the same reaching, the same need for a centre, a gathering place, a sacred hill. You are part of the long story. You have always been part of it. Rest in that. Let it hold you. The last part of our journey will be here when you are ready. The gentlest, slowest, most reflective part. The part where all the threads come softly together, and the story begins to breathe itself into silence. But that is for the next breath of time. For now, just this. Just the quiet weight of the whole deep night. Just the hill. Just you. Just this breath. And this one. And this one. Good night.